The following lore, included in Lost Notes Groupies, is based on personal histories of sex, drugs, and rock and roll from the previous century. Any stories, as told to us, belong solely to the speakers and their memories. Previously on Groupies.
Star was entertainment. It was provocative and seductive. It pushed the envelope.
Well, I wasn't a groupie yet. I was brought in from junior high and thrown into the scene with Sable and Len. It started at Star Magazine.
Before the Slutmobile. Before the Starship. Before the motherfucking Stairway to Heaven. Back in 1969, Led Zeppelin first landed in America, and a young Jan Huelski was a witness.
They were like warlords dressed in frippery and beautiful hair and really could play. It was showy. It was hot. It was, it just sent ripples of excitement through this rock community.
In a few years, Jan Huelski would become a senior editor of Cream magazine, where she works as an editorial director today, and is speaking of her own personal memories as her opinions and stories do not reflect the opinions of her employer. But in '69, before she became a pioneering rock journalist, her cool teen job was Coke Girl, which meant she was selling soda pop, okay? At Detroit's Rock and Roll Palace, the Grandee Ballroom. Jan loved Jimmy Page from the Yardbirds. He was a known guitar god in the lineage of his fellow Yardbird alums Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck. And the Yardbirds were popular, sure. They had a string of top 40 hits like For Your Love, etc. So folks were like, cool, I'll go check out this guy from the Yardbirds' new band. Why not, on Sunday evening in the dead of January in Detroit?
And the first night, there were about 50 people who came to see this band, just out of the Yardbird references. And they just blew everybody away. The second night, there were 200 people. The last night that they played, the whole ballroom swelled with people. People told people. It's like they told two friends, and they told two friends, and they told two friends.
Jan could sense this wasn't just a hot new band. This was a musical phenomenon in the making. Zeppelin were explosive and contagious.
I was so magnetized by their performance that I was a bar girl, and I went and took my break during their set, and I just got up on the stage and stood behind them and put my elbows on Jimmy Page's amp. This was like the beginning, and Detroit was one of the ground zero places for Led Zeppelin. They would never play any place so small again. They would do these giant tours. It was like they would put tickets on sale, and in 22 minutes they'd be sold. There would be fights outside. There were always fights and fires, and just, there was always some kind of strange mayhem around them. A lot of it had to do with how ridiculously beautiful they were as humans, like tall in stature. Jimmy Page was bigger than the average English rock star. The golden god reputation of Robert Plant was already there with tossing blonde hair. John Paul Jones was like beautiful and stoic and a boss. And Bonzo was probably the most dangerous drummer alive. And you just felt like something had shifted. This wasn't Cream. This wasn't the Yardbirds. This wasn't any other English band that we've seen. It was certainly not the Beatles. They were not well behaved. There was danger afoot, and you knew that things weren't going to be the same.
From KCRW and Golden Teapot, this is Lost Notes Groupies, and I'm Dylan Tupper Rupert. This season, I'm taking you into the world of the legendary groupies of the Sunset Strip, from the pill to the dawn of punk. Get in the Slutmobile, loser, we're going groupieing. It would take, just a couple years for Zeppelin to go from an audience of 50 at the Grandee Ballroom to being the biggest rock band on the planet. And by all accounts, they took advantage of it. It wasn't just that they were virtuosic, erotically charged rock and rollers. They were dark. And they were fucking heavy.
I think if they had any competitors, it was the Rolling Stones, a long-established, everybody's dangerous band. Except that Led Zeppelin supplanted them. They were much more dangerous. They would go for it, where the Rolling Stones were a little fey, a little well-dressed, a little middle class, and Led Zeppelin came from nowhere. You don't even know where they were from, and you knew that they were going to go for it. Sometimes I think, in terms of the groupie aspect, there weren't even groupies until there was Led Zeppelin. Not in the way that we know it, because they just evoke some kind of primal kind of reaction in everybody. You wanted to meet them. You wanted to be near them. And if you were, it was a little scary.
Led Zeppelin were the very pioneers of all the cliches we have today about the utter debauchery and unbridled vices of rock superstardom. Private jets, entourages, heavies to do your bidding, a fleet of limos, televisions flying out of windows, mud sharks.
I think that being a rock star gives you special dispensation to not abide by the rules. Everything comes towards you, whether it's wheeling women or drugs, and you're not paying for many of these things anyway, and there seems to be no repercussion, no piper to pay.
Whatever image you have in your mind of how batshit these rich, young, fully unhinged lads could be, you're still not even close to the kind of shit that is shamelessly reported on every page of their tour manager Richard Cole's memoir. Their rise was meteoric, and the money this band was making on touring was unprecedented. Their manager insisted that Led Zeppelin took 90% of the ticket sales, not the industry standard of 50-50. By May 1973, the band broke the Beatles' Shea Stadium attendance record. Literally bigger than the Beatles and the Stones. And it was just Led Zeppelin, no openers, playing a 4-hour set.
They were selling out everything. They were making, millions of dollars. And I remember there was a big brouhaha because one of their takes from, I think, just even one show, they'd gotten stolen out of a hotel safe in Detroit, like over $100,000. Like $100,000 was one night, and then $1973, that was a lot.
In today's money, that's over $730,000.
And they spent it. This was a band that was like not even doing press. They did not like doing press until they'd come to some watershed moment. I remember Danny Goldberg, the publicist for Swan Song Records, saying there was like a turning point where they realized I think it was the Rolling Stones had been on either Time or Newsweek, and they said, well, we're bigger than the Rolling Stones. We need to be out there. So there was a shift, and that's when they started doing press, and that's how I got in the door.
Jan started working at Cream magazine managing subscriptions, but soon rose in the ranks to become a senior editor, and one of her first major assignments was to go on tour with Led Zeppelin.
They asked me if I wanted to go to New York, and I said, sure, I'd love to go see Led Zeppelin. I had reviewed a couple of the albums, and I went, with my little Samsonite luggage and my Midwestern ways and my like tight black sweaters. I thought, I'm on tour with Led Zeppelin. I had no idea what was going to be there. It's like they headquartered me in the Plaza Hotel. It was luxury and wonderful and great, and they didn't talk to me for a week, but every night we would get on the Starship plane.
The Starship was Led Zeppelin's personal jet, a Boeing 720B that they leased and converted into what has been called the Rock and Roll Air Force One.
And we would go to another city because they headquartered there, and every night they would just fly out to another city. And still no one would talk to me, so I just like took copious notes. So, Jimmy Page with his arm around a most beautiful man who looked just like him, and Robert like disappearing into the white fur-lined bedrooms with, his really posh girlfriend, that his tour wife, as they used to call them. There was drinking, there were knife games, there was dice, there was like a doctor with a satchel full of Quaaludes that when I did finally talk to Jimmy Page, they had gotten stolen. Someone had lifted him from the tour doctor, and I had the audacity to ask him if he did it. So, it was like drugs and debauchery. It was everything that you thought rock tours were like, but never are. It was like this. So it was amazing. This was big business. I mean, who stays in the plaza for like a month at a time, and has rooms for like rock writers too, has a whole like floor of suites. There was this almost generosity of spirit around it.
That generosity of spirit was matched by a generosity of pussy.
Girls would buzz around them, but there was something about the allure and the kind of mystique of Led Zeppelin that people were a little reluctant to approach them. I mean, number one, they had bodyguards. Number two, Peter Grant was formidable. Number three, like John Bonham was scary always. He might do something on tour, or it wouldn't be out of the ordinary that he would pick you up and turn you upside down. So they were not really an accessible band.
The Sunset Strip provided all the infrastructure that rock and roll infamy needed to sustain itself. It's where the rich, famous, and those who love to be around the rich and famous came to do whatever the fuck they wanted. Anything went, and that's how it went for most of the 20th century. It's hard to imagine a Hollywood without paparazzi or city police, but that's what the Strip was like then. A safe space for girls who were bad but not evil, and rock stars who were dangerous. Led Zeppelin were actual bad boys that, in every sense of the word, pushed everything one step further. And they zeroed in on Los Angeles as their home away from home, where their wildest sides would be welcomed with wide open arms and legs. Pamela Des Barres writes in her memoir, I'm With the Band, about when she initially encountered Jimmy Page in LA. Led Zeppelin had just played a gig at the Whiskey during their first U.S. run. When Miss Pamela walked into the after party with fellow GTO Miss Mercy, she saw a flurry of groupie buzz all around the band's table. And on its knees underneath it. Tour manager Richard Cole was carrying a girl upside down by her ankles and had his face in her crotch. Pamela wrote that she wasn't quite sure whether or not that was consensual. Suddenly, from across the Hieronymus Bosch painting of sexual surrealist madness, Miss Pamela locked eyes with one Dark Lord, Jimmy Page, sitting quietly above the fray, it seemed. Miss Mercy whispered an ominous warning into Pamela's ear. Dangerous man. Alongside Led Zeppelin's hard-partying reputation, Page's alleged interest in whips and chains preceded him. Pamela kept her distance, but she was intrigued. Later that year, Zeppelin was back in LA to play Anaheim in early August of 1969. As she recounted in I'm With the Band, Pamela acquiesced to Jimmy's piercing gaze, and they consummated the sexual tension over a lost weekend at the Chateau Marmont, a place no stranger to hard-partying celebrity antics. Pamela just couldn't stay away from the pull of Jimmy Page, but to her, it suddenly felt like she had crossed over into the dark side. And maybe she couldn't go back. Maybe no one could. Because you know what else was happening that very weekend, just up those Hollywood hills? up on Cielo Drive, the Manson family murders. Like many in Hollywood, the Manson murders fully spooked Zeppelin's managers. The quiet privacy of those tucked-away hillside bungalows at the Chateau Marmont didn't seem so safe anymore. Another hotel was glad to have them. They even broadcast it on the marquee outside, over the valet port. Welcome, Led Zeppelin. And that was the Continental Hyatt House, for it was known, famously, to be 100% down for whatever.
It was kind of a dumb, it wasn't posh. It wasn't like staying at the Chateau Marmont or the Beverly Wilshire or anything like that. But, when they started, it was probably that they just looked the other way. You could, do what you're going to do, and no one was worried if screams came out of your room.
If the Chateau Marmont was where celebrities went to be bad in secret, the Riot House was for bands who maybe didn't care who saw, or were so powerful that they could make it their own little fiefdom. Which, for Led Zeppelin, was part of the appeal. Soon after they started making it their home base, they began renting out entire floors and staffing it with their private security and off-duty cops to guard the elevators. Part of this security rig was to protect their personal safety as megastars. And part of this was to protect the privacy of what they were up to while away in LA. Jan witnessed this firsthand.
Yeah. I think for a while, the one thing about Led Zeppelin was they always were shrouded in this veil of secrecy. They tried to keep all their bad boy behaviors on the QT, and they did for such a long time. But they were really like they loved LA and they were on the scene, so you would see them in the rainbow. They were so much a fixture that you stopped reacting to it. It was just part of the landscape. So paparazzis, like photographers from LA, would try to shoot them. Well, they couldn't really shoot them going in the parking lot because their bodyguards would accompany them and would strong-arm them.
As Zeppelin's celebrity exploded, this level of secrecy became harder to maintain, as evidenced by one famous picture.
And one day, the veil has been pierced. All of a sudden, you see Led Zeppelin in the act of being themselves, sitting at one of the tables, and there are the two primary beautiful groupies flanking them, Sable Starr and Lori Maddox. And you realize that this is really going on. Back to the wives back in London, I'm sure much to their dismay, but this was going on. They were like part of that LA scene, and they were partaking in all of the delights of it. And those were delightful girls. That was who they were. So you saw them really in the act of being that, and they were no longer these monolithic, mythic figures. They were flesh and blood rock stars like any other rock stars doing, LA, what's the phrase? That's where bad people go to do bad things. So, caught in the act.
Morgana Welch was a teenage groupie in the early 70s, and she was there with her friend Tyla when the photo was taken. In fact, she's in this very picture with Led Zeppelin and those notorious, beautiful baby groupies. Here's Morgana.
So that night, we were at Tyla's house, who lived right behind the Hyatt House, and we knew Zeppelin was coming into town. So we went to the Hyatt lobby to wait for them to arrive. And I ran into John Paul Jones, and he said, we're going to be going out tonight. If you want to come along, be in the lobby at whatever time it was. So, we quickly ran home, got dressed. And it was just me and Tyla and one other girl who I didn't know that was with John Bonham. And so first stop, we headed over to Rodney's in limos. And we are sitting in that table that the picture was taken in. And, after a little bit, a half hour or so, there comes Sable and Lori, who, neither one of me and Tyler really didn't like them at all. Especially Sable, who is, in my opinion, a mean girl. And just the way they plop down in that picture is still funny to me. And so at that time, there really were no paparazzi. Rock stars could pretty much get away with anything because there was nobody out there taking pictures. So this is like the first time I ever encountered, a random person, Richard Kramer, who hung out at Rodney's and took a lot of pictures, ever did like a shot, a photo of a band. And it really angered the band. It was John Bonham's birthday. They were out celebrating shortly after that picture was taken. And there were a lot of others taken of us besides that one they use a lot.
Let me describe to you my own personal Last Supper. My apologies to the nuns who taught me religious art history at Catholic school, if they're even alive out there, but this is an incredibly important spiritual document to me. Okay, so here they are at the VIP booth at Rodney's English Disco, which I have to tell you guys, lest you think this is a really posh Hollywood club, when we say glam rock, it's not old Hollywood glamour. It's glitter glue and pasted on sequins. This place looks like a fucking Buco de Beppo meets senior prom at rock and roll high school. The club has brick walls and photos of rock stars pasted up all over, and across the small table in the VIP booth is a red checkered tablecloth and frosted mugs of beer, and all around this foretop sits Sable Starr, perched with her arm around Robert Plant, next to another groupie, and a couple more groupies, and then some dudes, Bonzo in a spunky little hat, and to his right is Lori Lightning. And in the center of it all, like Jesus in the Last Supper painting, if only by virtue of being in the middle and having a center part, is Morgana Welch.
They were really annoyed at the picture being taken. I guess because prior to that, there weren't a lot of pictures of rock stars, cheating on their wives or whatever, being with young girls. It just never happened prior to things going on at Rodney's, where, photographers hung out a lot there, especially after that. So they wanted to get out of there quickly. So we did, and that's kind of when Jimmy Page met Lori Maddox. So they came with us to the next stop, which was the Rainbow. And they kind of cleared part of the Rainbow out for the band to come. Not completely, but they did, clear some space for the band.
You may recall the story from episode 1.
And everybody kind of scattered. John Paul Jones left, and Jimmy and Roy Harper went into another room, and I don't know what happened with Robert. Maybe he and Tyler were together. I don't really remember. But that was another big change in bands. Now they were not free to kind of do what they wanted.
If I had $1 for every time one of our subjects in the show said, it was a different time, it was before social media, I would have enough money to license actual Zeppelin songs. But in all honesty, it's just true. These pictures were printed in music rags like Rock Scene or Rona Barrett's Gossip Column or Jan's own Cream magazine. And you know who else read those magazines, besides music fans and groupie girls? The rock and roll wives back at home. Jan remembers interviewing Robert Plant with his tour wife by his side.
He was talking about one of the goals of rock and roll is to take a good woman, didn't have to be your wife, take a good woman and live a good life. And he pretty much licked his lips. It was like very kind of seedy. And then he goes, "Oh, I hope this doesn't get back to England." And after I did the piece and I talked about all the things that were going on in very great detail about everything I'd seen, the publicist, the same one who sat in on my Jimmy Page interview, called me and said, "You will never talk to them again." It was like everything you said, their wives read. And I thought, yeah, right. English rock wives are reading Cream magazine and American magazine. But the fact was, whether it did or it didn't, it must have been hellish to be one of those wives anyway. But they were mindful of it, but didn't stop the behavior.
If you've lived in LA long enough, the name Rodney Bingenheimer might ring a bell. He's one of LA's most influential living radio DJs. He hosted Rodney on The Rock on LA's 106.7 K-Rock from 1976 to 2017. It was a show that broke tons of punk bands and earned him legend status, so much so that Mick Jagger once described him as a famous groupie, now respectable. A note on that alleged respectability, though: in the last decade, Rodney has been accused of sexual assault by multiple women. So, yeah. Remember Morgana's story about being gifted to him with a bow at his send-off party to the UK? She wrote about this in her memoir, Hollywood Diaries. This image of Rodney running around the party going, "Hollywood, teenage, Hollywood, teenage."
That was his thing. He had this little hand movement, with his little fingers, "Ooh, teenage," and yeah, I think he probably used it all his life. And there was some, I don't know, I think it was pretty prevalent at those times that teenage girls were sought after.
Rodney was somebody, and it just seemed like somehow he knew all the other somebodies too. In fact, the point of his UK trip was to meet up with a new Mercury Records artist, one he was hoping to break into the States. And that artist was David Bowie. When Rodney returned to Los Angeles, he had a golden directive from the alien rock god in the making himself. Allegedly, it was Bowie who had suggested to Rodney that he should open a club in Hollywood, specializing in the glam rock that was just beginning to pick up steam in the States. He could import all the hot singles coming out of the UK and be the first to break them in America. So in 1972, Rodney returned from England in a blaze of Bowie-sanctioned glory and opened the legendary, extremely all-ages, Rodney Bingenheimer's English Disco, right on the Sunset Strip.
It was a playground for girls, and people were just attracted to come up there. And I think the girls were getting younger and younger. And Rodney was a great place for all the younger kids, which was mostly like a high school place, in my opinion, where the high school kids went. I think the easy access made it possible for them to do that. They weren't shut out of these places.
Suddenly, there was no hipper or more welcome place for teenagers to come to the Strip and get a taste of this even more colorful, saturated, glittery, over-the-top, sparkly, new form of rock and roll extravagance. This wasn't your Topanga Canyon fringe and denim or Laurel Canyon peasant blouses. No. This was Hollywood hot pants and liberated ass cheeks. And glam rock attracted teenagers in a different way than the other subcultures of the LA rock scene at the time.
Nobody had ever seen anything like David Bowie before, Mark Bolan. It was much more, even much more sexual, much more, and it was very exciting and different, like nothing we'd ever seen. And so that kind of shock value then was attractive. And I think that was the thing about Hollywood. There was a certain shock value. There was a certain breaking of the norms.
Rodney's English Disco set a new paradigm for the Sunset Strip. Hollywood. Teenage. He honestly just could have named his club that. But as Morgana points out, Rodney's was a reflection, like from a funhouse or maybe a cocaine mirror, of the culture of sex in the 70s, at least in Hollywood.
It was just there in Hollywood. I mean, if you went up to Sunset and Holloway, that's where the street hookers would hang out. And if you went down to Santa Monica, that's where the boys would hang out. And it was just really a part of our culture. It was there. It was in our face. It wasn't there in Beverly Hills. Well, it was, but it was tucked away, So, and then these books were coming out. Coffee, Tea, or Me, The Happy Hooker. These were books that were in my mother's house that I read. The Kama Sutra. So sex was, I guess, for women, maybe a way that women could use their sexuality as power. It was sort of in our culture trickling in. Even Cosmopolitan magazine was sort of promoting that in a way. I'm not saying being a hooker, but I mean, for me, it was there. It was just all over Hollywood.
But to Rodney's credit, the English disco scene wasn't only teenage. Because it was the place to be, it attracted rock stars and those looking to party and be on the cutting edge of what was new in British rock and roll. Even for someone living halfway across the country in Detroit, like Jan Uelski.
I'd never been there, but honestly, I thought that was the heartbeat of that whole scene. Like when I read about that was a place I wanted to go. I mean, it was one of the places where Iggy Pop slashed himself, it felt like he was trying to commit suicide on stage. I mean, David Bowie would go there and spin records. I mean, Rodney who, once you meet Rodney, you're surprised that he was such a lightning rod for all these people, but people loved him. I mean, one of the first places Joey Ramone wanted to go when he first came to LA. I felt the same way about that place. I mean, I think everybody did. I mean, even the name is just cool. It's like a club in England. It's like the Speakeasy in London. Like everybody was there, like the Runaways would come from the Valley or wherever, Canoga Park. I forgot where they're all were from, and take 3 buses to get there. And why wouldn't you? That was a place worthy of a pilgrimage.
By the time Lori Lightning was partying at the English disco, she was already becoming a scene queen. She was besties with Sable, who was going out with Iggy Pop at the time. They'd be hanging out at the main man house and then just pop over to Rodney's and keep the party going. It instantly became part of the new strip circuit. Here's Lori.
So you could be underage and go there and dance all night and dress in your platforms and have fun and go there. And I was just in awe of all of it, but I was terrified of men because I hadn't had any yet. I mean, I was just kind of going with the flow. Rodney would turn us on to all this new music. He started that sort of glitter rock revolution, which was, the sweet, David Bowie, blah, 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 blah. So we were dancing to all of that, and T-Rex and Mott the Hoople. And so we were turned on to all this British invasion rock, which was amazing.
Sometimes I think people think maybe the English disco was a live music venue, but it was Rodney importing.
No, it was
the
Rodney
British
playing
bands.
records. It was him DJing. He's a DJ. So that's what he did. He DJ'd. And he played all the most amazing records because Rodney has an ear for music that he doesn't get credit for. I mean, Rodney is amazing. He sort of revolutionized, all of these rock stars that people don't understand. David Bowie was nothing in America till Rodney introduced him.
Here's Jan again.
He's a short guy with perfect hair and seemed to be a magnet for stars. You'd think he'd be just like him, but he was very much like that Andy Warhol kind of figure, very soft-spoken, very like a human being. You never got a sense of him. I didn't think he was a huge intellect, but he was a genius about picking music. He was a genius in mixing people up. He was a genius in what is next. And for that, he was beyond that. He was a savant.
That scene was the intersection of rock and glam and everything else all at once. Zeppelin, Iggy, Bowie, the baby groupies, the world's oldest teenagers, they were all mashed together on one sweaty dance floor. There was this shared sexual charge between Led Zeppelin's bad boy brand of heavy rock and roll and the slutty, sparkly allure of glam rock. For one, they were both English phenomena and decidedly over the top. There was a certain frequency to this kind of sexed-up, British-accented androgyny that was like a dog whistle to LA teenagers. They just loved these effeminate rockers. For this is a city that famously loves its beautiful people. And its own gorgeous reflection.
You always have to remember about LA, everybody is good looking. Either their parents or grandparents came from Iowa, came from Idaho to be movie stars and failed at that, but decided to stay. So you have a gene pool of very beautiful people and very beautiful people who have now settled in the suburbs. And then Glam is a perfect opportunity for them to be showy and to show, what they have. And Led Zeppelin at the time, and David Bowie certainly, and Iggy Pop, they were foppish rock stars. They dressed up. That was the fashion of the time. I mean, if you look at old pictures of Jimmy and Robert, they're wearing girlish clothes. They're very glam. They may not be wearing like the glam of David Bowie and platform shoes like that, but they were very conscious of their attire. And I always have this contention that there are those who can wear a scarf and those who can't. And the members of Led Zeppelin could all wear a scarf. Maybe not Bonzo, but the rest of them could. I think that the people at Rodney's disco were, happy to be among royalty. Like, no matter what their origins, they were living on Mount Olympus, like I said. It's like, what's that Ian Brown saying? It doesn't matter where you're from, it's where you're at. Where they were at is where everybody wanted to be.
Here's Morgana.
I was totally into Zeppelin. Yeah, I loved their music, and it was really nice when I really didn't have to pursue them. They came to me, which was, very nice. So I went down to the Hyatt lobby just to sit, it's always a great people watching place. So I was sitting down there just kind of checking out who was down there. And a man came up to me and said, "My friend wants to meet you." And I'm thinking, kind of like turned off. And then I look across the room and I see this guy walking toward me, and it was John Paul Jones. And I'm like, oh, shit. So he introduced himself to me and told me he had to find somebody, and asked me if I wanted to go with him, which was not back to the Hyatt. It was to a private home he was staying at. So I said, yeah. And at that time, there was like wall-to-wall people trying to get into the coffee shop. And so, all this is happening in front of all these people, which, I could glance over and just see the jaw dropping. And so I said, yeah, I'll go with you. And we spent like 24 hours together till he was in the studio producing somebody, and we stayed together till the next day, which was probably one of the highlights of my life.
Led Zeppelin were famous and always had groupies around. But in LA, the groupies were celebrities too. Here's Jan again.
It was like the ascendancy of Star magazine and those Star girls. And you would read about Jimmy Page and Lori Maddox, and it seemed like a really beautiful love story. I mean, for a guy who looks so dangerous, who looks so, like whoremongery, kind of rootin' tootin', I'm going to get my whip out and really punish you first and humiliate you a little. He seemed to show his sweet side in his relationship with Lori Maddox, who was very young and, again, rather resembled him, the dark hair and the dark eyes. But it seemed like a bona fide love story. I think he really fell in love with her and seemed to take care of her And I think that I'd read an interview once where when he was back in England, he'd call her every day. So some of the groupies just were in it for sex and status, and some of them were in it for love, and I think she was in it for love, but I think it ran both ways. It really showed a different side of him, like this deeply romantic side of Jimmy Page. Lori is the one I saw up close. She was willowy, coltish, a little unformed, like really like dark olive skin and cascading brown curls. Again, much like Jimmy Page's. Just like perfect skin, a teenager's body, so not an ounce of fat, like not model thin, but beautiful girl thin, not like the cheerleader type at all, more like kind of an exotic beauty that could have come off of some island. She was just really perfection. And Sable was the opposite. She was beautiful in her own kind of au courant blonde and curly way, with her tube tops and little skirts and platforms. I mean, they were both beautiful. They were very yin and yang. They were very antithesis of each other, like the light and the dark, kind of like Robert and Jimmy. But they were just, they were archetypes of that time. And they were really the model of other groupies afterwards.
The groupie thing just hit different in LA in the 70s. It was a whole subculture on its own. Rock stars could show up in this scene and have their pick of girls. There was Star Magazine, a veritable catalog of teenagers they could pick up while in town. Sometimes it was purely transactional. Sometimes, for better or for worse, it was a lot more complicated than that.
I think it was just the kicks just keep getting harder to find, that for the rock stars, the Led Zeppelin, that decadence was they had done everything else, and new horizons, new vistas, new sensations. So I don't think they were dragging anybody into that scene. I think everyone went there willingly. I didn't see a lot of it other places. Like, it seemed to be centralized in Los Angeles and the pages of Star Magazine.
And at the center of it all was a very teenage Lori Lightning, who was having way too much fun to ask many questions. And honestly, no one else around her was asking questions either.
I don't know what I was thinking, but I felt I felt much more mature than I was at my age, I think, because I was brought up in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And I had a different upbringing than most normal people in middle America. I witnessed Hollywood, Elvis, Priscilla, all of that. You know what I mean? So, and actually Jimmy called my mother. Right, when I was when he sent her roses, and so my mom just said, "Well, I guess Led Zeppelin is in L.A." and she thought of Priscilla Presley and Elvis. She probably thought I was going to marry him or something. I don't know what she thought. This is one thing, because her one daughter is getting in trouble. I think my sister she was hanging out with these like bad kids, and she got arrested for grand theft auto. And then her other daughter's dating Jimmy Page. Yeah. So she's like, well, what's worse?
Led Zeppelin would use the Hyatt House not just as their LA home base, but their American one. Who wants to spend the night in St. Paul, Minnesota, no offense, when you have the Starship to fly you back to your Lori in waiting? I'm just following Jimmy Page logic here. Because after Lori had officially usurped Pamela as Jimmy Page's LA girl, the routine would be, when Jimmy would stay in LA, he would post Lori up in the hotel room, where she would hang around in luxury, waiting for him. You might ask, why wouldn't he just take Lori on the road with him? Well, the Mann Act, which prevents the transportation of minors across state lines. So this was the routine.
I felt safe because I was on a floor with security. And he made me very comfortable. I mean, I was madly in love. I didn't, I don't know, I don't really know anything else because he swept me off my feet and he was a god to me. And because I never had that father figure, he was somebody I looked up to and trusted. Mm-hmm. And he kind of, he kind of hid me.
That's what
he locked me up.
Right.
He kind of hid me. I don't know how to explain it. I felt like he loved me. What did I know? I was a baby. I didn't know any different. He was my everything. I put him on this pedestal and he would it's not every little girl that can go sit on the ground, and he'd play guitar to me and we'd start crying. He'd play acoustic guitar to me and we'd sit on the floor and cry. And he would bring me gifts. You have to understand that during the period that we were dating, they ended up renting the Starship because he would want to come back to LA and be with me. It was so for that whole year, he would fly out, go to a show, and come back that night because I couldn't go. I was underage, obviously.
Yeah.
But, so he'd always have me picked up in a limo, and then they'd bring me to the room, and I'd sit in the room and wait for him until he got there. And then he'd come in, and it was just it was so beautiful to me. It was I was in the height of my innocence. Yeah. What do I know?
What Lori knew was that she, in particular, was chosen. And being chosen was the dream. The reality on the other side of the dream, the answer of chosen for what, was, no matter how precocious the teenager, an impossible perspective for a 14-year-old to have. Because being chosen feels like purpose. And what else can a girl fully know at 14 but what she feels? Next time on Lost Notes.
By 1976, we were 17. We were already washed up at 17 years old, and we knew it all.
The other young teens who were in the music scene. Not the baby groupies. The future baby punks.
The change between glam and glitter and punk was suddenly that everybody was equal.
Sable and Lori and the other groupies were local celebrities to us.
From KCRW and Golden Teapot, this is Lost Notes Groupies, Women of the Sunset Strip from the Pill to Punk. This season was created, written, and executive produced by Jessica Hopper and me, your host, Dylan Tupper Rupert. Executive producers from KCRW are Gina Delvac and Arnie Seipel. The executive producer for Golden Teapot is Lauren Redding. Our senior producer is Michael Catano. Our supervising producer is Alexandra Nelson. Our research producer is Jessica Calvanico. Sound design and mix is by Michael Hardman. Score and original music is from Carmen L. Special thanks to Natalie Hill, Megan Ellingbo, and Jennifer Farrow.